Hey everyone, this is Nick LaRue. Welcome to FilmSnobbery. I am here today with a director, not here in the US. She's over there in the UK. Her name is Maria Calado, and we're here to talk about her short film that is in development currently, Mother Monster. Hello, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. Did I get all of that information correct?
You did. You did really well. And you got my
Fan
name pronounced correctly, which doesn't always happen.
I can
Yeah.
imagine, let's talk a little bit about first your what brings you here. We're here to talk about a movie. We're here to talk about it. Let's talk about you. Tell me about you as a person, as a filmmaker, as what brought you to all of this.
Yeah, I mean, I have been working in film for a couple of years now. I've been working in film for about 6 years. Between here, I've worked, briefly in the Netherlands and also briefly in the US. So I've worked quite a bit like internationally, and I guess film kind of started through a bit of luck. I was in high school given a couple of different pieces of equipment, and it just clicked because before that, it was just theater. And that was kind of my introduction to it, but kind of getting to really work with equipment and have that structure was really what dragged. And since then it's been just head on and going. And so I've been working in film, I guess, for about 6 years at this point. And a lot of it, has been working with short films and getting people together and getting people that I trusted and like that trusted me, and we had a relationship, and getting us together to make films that we're passionate about things that we care about. And just making films together, I think, is such a the process of it is just such a creative mind battle. So I've found much love for it, and since then it's just kind of been ongoing. And since then, I do a lot of producing as well on the side when I'm not directing my own work. So I've been doing a lot of that, and then also I was able to actually be a jury member for a BAFTA qualifying film festival here in the UK. So that was obviously, a great introduction into more of the film festival world and how, juries actually make these decisions. And yeah, a little bit about me in terms of outside of film.
Mhm.
Um, I am originally Portuguese, but I grew up in the Netherlands. I spent most of my life there, and now I'm in the UK.
That's
So
fantastic. You talk about t doing stories, making films and telling stories about things that you care about. What are the things that you care about?
yeah, I think, every movie that I make, whether it's explicitly said or not, is in some way political, because I think, that doesn't mean I'm talking about political parties or anything, but it's in some way political, and that I feel these are the people that aren't getting their voices heard, that these are the issues that aren't getting their voices heard. I made a short film about a deaf woman who was in a queer relationship and lost her partner, and that feeling that grief when you can't hear it was something that I wanted to investigate, and that came from being in a shop and seeing a deaf woman struggle to communicate with one of the people who worked at that store. And I felt so much kind of empathy for that, and pain for that. And so I think actually a lot of these stories come from personal moments in my life, and then they kind of escalate to kind of different what ifs, if like they were in this position. Or I think getting different people's perspectives is always something that has intrigued me. So I don't like writing about myself. I will try and stray away from me as much as possible. I like writing about other people that I find interesting and have interesting things to say, and
Mhm.
it kind of develops from that.
I think
Yeah.
that, even as much as, as someone who I'm a writer myself, I I approach a lot of my initial ideas very similarly. I will go and I'm like, oh, I see something that's really cool. What if it was this though? And, I do that, but I do somehow always end up putting something of myself in that, whether it's just, oh, that's my perspective as the guy who looks like this and grew up the way I did, or something like that. Or, it's very interesting. I do, you said also something very not great, which is, the politics, something art being political without it necessarily having to be party political. Like
Yes.
it's like I'm not on this team, I'm not on that team. I'm on the team of humanity, and I'm here to show, through this lens, that this art is political in this way, because whether it's inequality, inequity, or this, aspect of a human condition that maybe is ignored is that I think that's in essence I think what a lot of filmmakers are trying to achieve with their art. For the folks who are just are in the shut up and dribble, shut up and shoot the movie, shut up and do this kind of camp. It's really just like I don't think you understand what this is. Like you can't not do it. That's what this is.
Yeah. I think exactly as you said, I think it has nothing to do with trying to make a political statement, but trying to make like a social statement.
Yeah.
And I think that's more so of what I get at. I'm not trying to tell you who to vote for or anything. I find that truly like just egregious. But what I do want to tell you is like I want to give you an opportunity to connect with this person
Hmm.
and emotionally feel this person and almost have a discussion about this thing, but this thing is more about different ways in which we can connect to people and different ways in which we can feel for this person. And that's definitely an approach I took for this film is like I do not want this to be an intellectual discussion.
Hmm.
I want this to be an emotional, like visceral thing where you can actually like feel as if you were this character, as if you were this person.
Hmm. Now that's interesting because I feel like we live in a time right now where a facts versus feelings argument is something that is had often, and there's a bit of a flip-flop on that. Like, and I say this as a neurodivergent person where I argue with my wife. My wife is a very emotional, emotive person, and I'm just like, well, that's not how that happened. This happened this way, and it's one thing to say, well, this makes me feel this way, but I'm like, but the accuracy of this is that. And I feel like in film, there's a couple of different ways to look at that is like you're looking at the factual things that are happening with this person, but then yes, you're trying to feel for this person. You're trying to get in their shoes. You're trying to get a hold of that emotion. And I find that I don't get upset with facts the same way that I get, in like an argument or something, the same way that like something will hit me in a character moment in a movie or a television show. And that is a really interesting kind of thing. With this movie, what are the things that you're trying to say with this lead character?
Yeah, well, the film that I'm making right now, it's about a mother who's just gone through childbirth, but her body continues birthing. And I think the whole perspective on this is that we're talking about it's almost a personification of postpartum depression and postpartum psychosis, which I took a lot from, the women in my life who have talked about their experiences, whether they call it that or not, but the connection to that. And I think what I'm trying to talk about is is how common it is for those two experiences to occur, and yet we don't really get to talk about them. We don't really address them as often as I think we should in art. And I think, as I said, I think I approach it very much trying to give you an emotional experience. And for this film, it was very much to allow you to feel how her body has changed and how that is an extremely difficult and topic that almost makes you feel like you're a different person because your body works in a completely different way. And your body never goes back to how it was, not after you finish birth, having a child, birthing. It never goes back to what it was. And I think having to come to the conclusion that you have ultimately changed can be a really identity altering process. And I wanted to allow people to get inside her mind, metaphorically, but to understand how that can feel dehumanizing and how that can feel completely traumatic and out of your hands, and like something inside of you spilling out
Mhm.
completely out of your control.
It's funny. We're seeing this period of time, and I don't think it's not a coincidence considering things that are happening all over the world. But we're seeing this period of time, especially in film and media, where the discussion between of women aging, perimenopause, menopause, childbirth, all of these things, both in fiction and in real life, seem to be really coming to the forefront. There's maybe it's just because I've reached an age and I have a wife who is similar in age to me where these conversations now happen.
Yeah.
But you look at things like and it's weird because it does go through the lens a lot of like body horror. right? Like it's these Cronenbergian, kind of, oh, bad things are happening to this woman's body, and it's just like, how much do you recognize, maybe to the men in the audience, that, like, her body's going through some shit regardless. Like, this is not necessarily like, this is fiction exaggerated, but there is a real life part of this that, is ongoing. And I grew up with two moms, so I mean, I've been around women my whole life, and you know, at every there are these milestones in people's lives where, things happen, and you're right, it doesn't stop. And was there anything in particular that inspired you to tell this story at this point in your life? Because you do seem younger.
Yeah. So this wasn't from my own personal experience having children. This was from the endless stories of the women in my life
Mhm.
who either um, had children when they were very young, when they didn't, they didn't really have even an opportunity to consider whether they wanted children. They didn't even get to really make that decision for themselves because the decision was have a child.
Yeah.
There was no other alternative. And then alternatively, even more in the modern day, I mean, a specific anecdote that comes up to me is my mom. She was pregnant with my younger sister, and it was her birthday, and all of the gifts that she got were for the baby. She got no gifts for herself. And while that is such a small moment, and my mom always says it didn't bother her, I think it says a lot about what we are expecting of mothers. And it says a lot of how we are expecting mothers to almost be narrowed down to one singular identity first and foremost. Before she has a kid, she has all of these attributes. I think before she has kids, she's so much more developed as a human being. And then socially, when she does have a child, when she becomes pregnant, when she gives birth, it's almost like that identity is forcefully diminished.
Mhm.
And first and foremost, her identity becomes that of a mother. And I always found that to be an interesting kind of discussion because I've never heard anyone talk about this. How, yeah, you hear about how painful birth is, and you have those discussions, but I never really heard anyone address how much of yourself you were required to give up
Mhm.
when you're having a kid. And
Yeah.
that was part of the emotional anchor that I had. I was like, if I was in that position, that would have affected how I saw myself.
Yep. I think marriage is similar in that too, where I think the assumption in marriage is that a woman is almost giving herself over to to being married to a man, and now that is, I mean, and obviously, like, historically speaking, like, the marriage contract is ostensibly, it's a property exchange, right? So like, it is almost kind of this thing of like, well, you had a life and good for you, you're his now, or yeah, it's so interesting that, the way that men's identity is defined by certain things societally, but women seems to always be identified by not who they are as an individual, but what they are going to be at some point to someone else.
Yes, exactly. I think that's precisely one of the key anchors of why I made this film. This is just one example of that. We could talk about hundreds, and I also think it's interesting and not a coincidence that marriage and birth and having kids are so similar in a lot of ways socially. I don't think that's a coincidence, but yeah, I think when we look at what women are expected to endure silently and carefully and glamorously, I think I think once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Mhm.
And that was something that I definitely went through. I was just understanding that, you look at it, especially with examples like in cinema or in TV, especially where you see these women give birth. And then at the end, there's like these violins playing when they've just given birth. And
Mhm.
like, it's like a glory, and I'm sure some births are great and, people have wonderful experiences. That's not to diminish that. But
Right.
the fact that it happens so often where a woman gives birth in a TV show, and then at the end she's holding this baby and everything's beautiful and it's just like flowers and like whatever. I always found that to be such a diminished example of what it actually takes to give birth.
Yep.
And so I wanted to give a different perspective on it that I think unfortunately not spoken about enough in industries. And or even another example in TV would be like a woman who spends her entire life saying she doesn't want kids, and then by the end her character arc is that she ends up having a kid.
Yeah.
And to me, that always struck me as so strange.
Yeah.
And I wanted to give a space where neither of those narratives are necessarily true.
Yeah. No, I think that in a lot of American television, I'm sure it's, probably fairly universal, but like in American television specifically, like you're absolutely right. Like the idea is, you tell women you can have it all, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But that all seems to always include these very specific pieces that have nothing to do with what she said her end goal is. It's all these great, you can have the CEO job, but you're gonna have to accept this stuff too, and to her, like, it's yeah, it's interesting, and you're absolutely right about the birthing process too. Like, I mean, everything, push, and then fade the black, and then you get the woman, and the baby's always cleaned up,
Oh,
like,
they always look beautiful, and the woman also looks beautiful. Like
oh, it looks
her hair is
beautiful,
perfect.
nice little
Yeah,
dewy shine on her, yeah.
of course. Oh, when I've seen that, I thought, oh God. I mean, I was always, and I was also raised by two parents who were always the first to call that out,
Yeah.
and I think that also changed how I saw it. It just, yeah, I mean, you never, when you see like a woman go through this horribly traumatic, horribly personal, intimate thing, and
Hmm.
at the end of it, she still has to come out
Yep.
skinny and beautiful and perfect hair and like not even sweating. That was always something that I wanted to almost contradict,
Yeah.
because while I'm sure there are women who had, again, perfectly beautiful birth stories, I cannot tell you how many times I've spoken with people who have told me that they haven't had a positive birthing story, that they
Yeah.
actually had a really traumatic experience. I was speaking to someone in the industry, actually, and they were male, but their female partner had a really traumatic birthing experience, and they said that she even developed a almost parasitic relationship with her kids. And
Yeah.
I think unfortunately that is much more common than we want to admit. And
Yep.
the more that I spoke to someone else who was saying that they grew up with a single mother and they saw that impact and they saw that effect. And those stories are individual, and yet they're so universal
Hmm.
that it is a bit of a pity that we don't really get to shine our light fully on that. And we are seeing more and more of that as we
Yeah.
move on, which is great. But I think we are getting to a point where the industry is really trying to say that these are the stories that deserve to be told, and audiences are very much telling us that these are the stories we want to see.
Yep.
um, but unfortunately, when you look at these big execs and these big production companies, these are still stories that aren't really put forefront, and kind of prioritized when they probably should be. When you look at films in the past couple of years, a lot of them were female centered. A lot of them had stories about women in difficult predicaments, and we're honest about that. I don't know if you've seen the movie called If I Had Legs I'd Kick You. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's a yeah, amazing film, and it did ridiculously well at the box office. It did
Yep.
ridiculously well. I mean, we continue to see that. Even Barbie, we can consider that to be kind of a bit more, kiddish and flowery, but it's still a film by women for women,
Hmm.
with women at the center of it. And continuously, we see these films go to, when they are allowed to be made, they are
Yeah.
made to incredible success. And so I think there's also something to be said about just giving space to these films and to these stories to be more forefront in this industry, when we know that they tend to do well. And the only reason they're not really put in the forefront is because of all these like social paradigms.
Yep. And I think you said that very properly too, of when they're allowed to be made. And I mean, unless you are a Greta Gerwig and they've made you $1 billion, are you going to be able to make, this, not even necessarily feminist, but humanist movie that puts women front and center, and or something like that. It's there, it does happen. I also go back to the Amy Adams movie Night Bitch, which talks about, postpartum depression and all of that, and all of these different things. There's all of these stories, and that women have about even the different stages of giving birth. Not it's like it's trauma on top of trauma. Like, okay, maybe the conception, maybe not ideal. If you're lucky, maybe it was, but probably not. Then
Yeah,
you
yeah.
have, you know, sorry. But then Then you got and then you have the pregnancy, which in itself is just your body going crazy, and then the delivery, and then after that you left with this thing to take care of. But while your body is in this state of recuperation for months, but you're expected to, in the United States, at least in the UK, you folks have healthcare that will be a bit accepting of like, oh, you need some time off, even
Yeah,
for men, someone like, oh, you just had a baby, that's great, take 6 weeks, or whatever it is. Here, it's just like, and so you had a baby on Friday, we're gonna see you on Monday, right? Like, yeah, I mean, there's a trial going on right now in the United States, I think, of a woman who is suing her boss because she was expected to be at work. She was literally in a meeting while she was on a webcam in the delivery room, like actively in labor.
yeah, and stories like that unfortunately are not uncommon.
Yeah.
And even yeah, even here, yeah, we get time off, which is wonderful, and not having time off, I'm sorry, I find crazy.
Crazy.
But yeah, but yeah, we get time off, but even then, there's this expectation that you almost have to, in some way or another, become a functioning, totally normal, totally emotionally cognitive member of society incredibly quickly.
Yeah.
For someone who, any other trauma of this caliber, you would not be expected to go back to society this quickly.
Yeah.
No way whatsoever. I mean, I think I was reading a paper where they were saying that giving birth is more painful than like heart attacks.
Yeah.
And I, from what I've seen, I believe that. And yet, someone goes through, a heart attack. They're not necessarily, always expected to go back into society, and be a functioning member, at least emotionally, and have all these things perfectly figured out. Whereas, you have a baby, you can take a couple of weeks off, but then you better be walking with that baby. You better be, giving that baby stimulus. You better be, doing all these things to, babies are incredibly high maintenance and rightfully so, but there's very little support to that
I'm an
process.
adult and I'm high maintenance. I mean, you come on.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. There's so little support to one of the most intimate
Hmm.
and traumatic, possibly traumatic moments in someone's life.
Hmm.
And I think the intimacy of it is also incredibly it's almost negligent in the way society treats the intimacy of this event. Birth is so incredibly intimate. Yes, you're covered in this like kind of like dressy thing, but someone is genuinely staring up at one of the most personal body parts you have,
Hmm.
and you are taking a baby out of that body part. I mean, beyond the kind of like genuinely physically traumatic element of that, there's such an intimacy of having someone you don't know, a doctor, rightfully so. They usually do an amazing job, but looking into one of your most intimate body parts. And I don't think, when you're in incredibly excruciating pain, I think that's such a, I don't think we all know this. We all know that that's how birth works, but I don't think we truly acknowledge
Hmm.
what that means.
No, absolutely. I mean, and even, medical studies that are done on, that are done about birth somehow tend to exclude women in that process,
Yes. Yes.
yeah. Now obviously I think at this point anyone who's watching this is just like, okay, um so let's give him something let's talk about another bit of trauma, which is making a movie, and which is what you're doing with this, and I want to talk about the challenges you're having with that. Let's start with crowdfunding. So like what made you decide to do the crowdfunding the way that you're doing it right now, as opposed to say a Kickstarter or Seed and Spark or some other kind of thing, versus what you're doing, and how's everything working out for you?
Yeah, so we did it through Crowdfunder, which is a UK, primarily a UK based app. And the reason why we did that was honestly logistical, I think, primarily rather than creative. I think it gives you a lot more opportunities if you're based in the UK. So it allows you to kind of have more access to money quicker based on UK bank accounts, and like it allows you to have that kind of access to it, whereas Seed and Spark requires more, American bank accounts and American details, and so that was part of why we decided to do it like that. But crowdfunding for us was access to something that, again, a lot of the industry doesn't provide to films like this, to films that are, incredibly intimate, but also do not shy back from showing whatever it is it needs to be shown, whether that feels really R-rated, which I don't like that word, but just to kind of get the point across, um, that is a very difficult film to pitch to traditional funding circles. Um, Films, we are an 85% women team. We are 50% immigrants, and 75% of us are based in Wales. That is an incredibly difficult film to pitch to traditional funding circles. And so allowing us to crowdfund helped us get access to the people that are actually going to watch this film, and
Mhm.
actual fans and actual film people, like people that actually understand why this film exists and understand the importance of it and find interest and excitement in it.
Mhm.
Um, that is the purpose of crowdfunding for us.
Fantastic. No, and for those folks that are I can understand having that difficulty within the traditional funding circles, especially in a place like the UK where it's a little more buttoned up in certain ways. It sucks because you're you know you have this wonderful team of diverse folks and all that kind of stuff. And the real bitch of it is that like all you really need, not what you need, but like it's just like I can imagine how much better this would, or how much easier this would be if it was just like if we just had a straight white man, right? Like
Yeah,
that's,
yeah, yeah,
like
100. Yeah.
just a straight white man with a bit of a posh accent, we're good to go, because I know that classism is a big thing up there too.
Oh yeah.
And the
Oh
accent
yeah.
makes a difference.
Yeah. No, definitely 100%. So the South, especially in England, the South and the North, very, very different.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Like if we had a majority, white British team, that would have been a completely different discussion to bring in. At the same time, if we decided to make the story a lot more covered up and a lot more, sanitized, that
Yep.
also would have been a completely different discussion.
Yeah.
But I find that would have been, to me, a completely dishonest way for me to tell the story.
Yeah.
Other people may be able to tell the story that way. I couldn't have been able to be completely honest in the way that I see the world, because
Mhm.
obviously, as a director, your worldview is very much going to distort the way this film is going to be seen, and obviously, it's going to be your voice. For me, that was going to be an incredibly difficult thing to have a complete, to have a film this intimate with mostly men and make it sanitized. To me, that would have defeated the point of the whole movie.
Yep, absolutely. Now, as far as where you are in the process of the movie, I know that crowdfunding usually that means you're in, some stage of pre-production, getting everything together and everything. Tell me a little bit about where you're at and where you hope to be in the near future.
Yeah, so we're hoping to shoot this summer. And that means that, yeah, we're currently in pre-production. We're currently still, our crowdfunder will be up kind of until the end. And I think when you look at indie film, that tends to happen a lot because you just kind of, any money at any stage is helpful. And you never get to a point where your funding is just, okay, it's done now. So that is something that we're definitely going to continue working on, and our crowdfunder is still up. And will be up until June. But the way that we're working on now is I've got, production managers working on getting locations. So our location is incredibly important to our film because it's based in the Welsh countryside, and a huge part of the story is her reconnecting with her roots and reconnecting with nature. And so having a really powerful location, especially in Wales, where it is so beautiful and like has such amazing scenery, for us, the location is one of the key aspects of it. And so that's something we're prioritizing right now. So we've got a couple of people looking into a couple of different locations, going into negotiations and whatnot. At the same time, we're also working on props.
Mhm.
So we've got the production management, or the production designer team, working on, things like body organs and things like fake babies and all of those kinds of things to allow us to actually like adhere to the genre a little bit.
Fantastic. So I would be remiss as the guy who wrote the book on indie film marketing, behind the scenes of indie film marketing, available now. Um, uh, what are your plans as far as once you get to the part where you're in post production? Are your plans to take it on the festival circuit? Are your plans to to try to see if this is something that you might be able to then use as a pitch maybe for a feature, or what is the grander plan, as it were, once production's finished?
Right. So when production is finished, this is definitely a festival first film. And so we will be taking it through, a lot of different international film festivals. A lot of them will be, in Europe because of just the connotation with kind of experimental art and the history with experimental art there. We're also hoping to, get some more like in the US and North America, especially. So we do have a list of film festivals that we want to have a run at, and we hope that the run is about a year long. At that point, we very much wish to kind of use this as a pitch for a longer piece, because right now the story is about 10 to 15 minutes long. And we hope to do a feature film or something at least a little bit longer, because I do think the way that it works now, because of its length, is very much about her experience reconnecting with nature solely in that, at her peak, when things are just kind of like stakes are rising so much that she cannot control her emotions, and the way she feels anymore, and she feels like she's completely lost control of her body. But from the moment which she finds out she's pregnant to this, we kind of hope to create a longer amalgamation of things that kind of lead her up to this moment, and talk about, the pregnancy process and what it means to be pregnant for 9 months, and all the repercussions towards that, and all the repercussions towards birth, and kind of create a longer narrative where we get to kind of also introduce the dynamics between a doctor and a patient, the dynamics between a partner and a pregnant woman, and kind of that longer process for sure.
Absolutely. No, that's I mean, we were just talking about how like this is just one part of that process, and what happens before and after are stories within themselves. So absolutely, that makes perfect sense. So this is a yeah, talking about the business of making films, I have obviously having that foundation of having a little bit of business acumen is important. Do you find that to be important in your process overall?
Yeah, I think so, because I think when you're working outside of kind of the industry guidelines, I think when you're working outside of these big production companies and these, big execs, where you are kind of getting your own money, you are getting your own resources, all of those things end up being little parts of the business. Now, you don't have to be, an investment and banker kind of person. You don't have to be a finance guy, but you do have to have some kind of ability to think outside the box and think about problem solving, and put yourself in uncomfortable situations, obviously with boundaries, but uncomfortable situations where you have to kind of learn new things along the way. I mean, one of the things about film that I think does make it somewhat uncomfortable, but is so important about it, is that it's always so different, that every single time you have to be ready to approach things completely differently. And sometimes you'll be doing things and it's not creative, but it'll let you get to the creative bits. And if you don't do that, you are not going to have a strong foundation for the creative bits, and they will fail. And that is the worst way to go.
And yeah, as far as this film is concerned, you are both the writer and the director. Do you have overall a preference to either of those? Are you more of a person who's like, I love taking the idea and synthesizing it into the thing that people see, or do you prefer to be like, I want to be the genesis of that idea?
Well, I think for this story in particular, the story really came from me. So it really stemmed from like, I want to write this story, and then we'll see how it goes. With stories that I would have never thought of. And I go, that is fantastic. And you've written it in a way that I never would have. And it's 100% better your way for this story, because it does come from like all of the stories of the women that I've heard in my life. I think I really wanted to write it myself and kind of approach it through kind of my own emotional guidelines. And so I also came into it very much with the sense of like, I would also need to direct this, just because I know exactly why I wrote everything that I did. And especially when you work kind of in experimental film or in indie film, where it's kind of maybe straying a little bit from the guidelines, I think it can be difficult to, not impossible, but certainly difficult to convey that to directors and other people who might not understand why you kind of took these risks and why these risks are important. For example, she spends a lot of this movie naked. And I have explained this to a lot of people who have not really understood the core synthesis of why that is the case. And I always explain that it's because of the intimacy of what it takes to give birth. And it is a kind of symbolic gesture of that intimacy. It is not to find a way to sexualize her, or find a way to kind of look at her body in a beautiful light with these concentrated studio lights. It is about showing how invasive and bodily um, and just traumatic this event can be, and how much to give birth, you need to connect to the body,
Mhm.
and how you really can't do one without the other. And that connection really felt important to me. And it is difficult to explain because it is such an emotional thing. It's a personal thing,
Mhm.
which is also why I wanted to direct this film. But yeah, I mean, you would be surprised at how good directors are at understanding your vision and having that discussion with people. Um, but it's not always the right decision, and I think that comes down to project per project.
Yeah. And I want to bring up that because you kind of brought up the idea of intimacy and all of that within this movie and the theme of that as well. And you're an independent production that is going to the trouble of using an intimacy coordinator. And I'm interested in hearing, was there an aspect of this that was both obviously this is first of all, intimacy coordinator is something that's become far more prevalent in film and television in general. So that's great. The second part of that is like, do you feel that as you're packaging this film with different actors and actresses that are in the film, which by the way, you have a wonderful cast, I want to discuss them next, that having an intimacy coordinator, especially with a film that is such a touches on such a sensitive subject, and requires things like nudity and things like that, does it make it a quote unquote easier sell for your lead actress, to be like, well, you will be looked after, like you will like some care is being taken to your sensitivities.
Definitely. And I think also it comes down to just respect. I think the actor, when you tell the actress who's putting themselves in such an intimate position, when you go through the trouble of getting them somebody who will be there to support them, who will look after them first and foremost, their priority is the actor. When you look at all these other crew roles, their not priority is not always the actor. And so the actor may feel some kind of hesitation towards of what's going to happen when maybe everyone is doing their own thing and I can't defend myself perfectly. Well, now that is taken out of the equation because you don't need to defend yourself perfectly. You just need to voice, and you have someone there to defend you at your beck and call, and to really be your biggest supporter. And I think for a film like this, you want to show how important your actor is to you, and you want to make that clear to the actor. Um, and to me, I mean, I always approach films like this. I mean, I want this film to be as enjoyable for me as it is for everybody else, and I want the actor to have an amazing time on set because I don't believe that a better performance is dictated by the actor being in a poor mood or being in poor conditions. Directors have done that before. It is not a new concept. I don't agree with it, and I don't think you get a better result out of it. I think you get a better result when you get the actress or actor comfortable and ready and comfortable with you and comfortable with the material, and that's when they'll try anything. That's when they will take their own creative liberty. And that is when I think you get so much better material, because I think when the actors are able to absorb the story in its entirety and absorb these characters entirely, I think that's when they can make much better creative decisions than I ever could. And I
Fantastic.
want to for that.
Wonderful. No, and where did you find this particular intimacy coordinator that you're working with?
So we actually use Backstage for a lot of these auditions. I find Backstage to be an incredibly helpful tool in order to find a lot of crew and a lot of cast. But it's not perfect. You're gonna get some weird submissions every now and then, but it's a great task. It's a great app for the most part. And we actually were able to find her on there, and then we had an interview where I really wanted to get an understanding for her and for how she was, and it just went absolutely splendidly because I think we saw things very similarly. And I think when you're trying to get a crew on a film like this, it's yes, it's about credentials. That helps the package, that helps you feel confident that they know what they're doing, but at the same time it is equally about how this person is able to interact as a team member, because film is first and foremost a collaborative. I think it's like a collaborative sport
Mhm.
in a lot of ways, and they need to be ready to go running as a collaborative team, and that's why I think interviews are so important, is because you get an idea for who these people are. And yeah, I was able to talk to a London-based intimacy coordinator, and she also has years of experience in dance and in movement, and I thought that was incredibly important for a film like this, where the body is basically a secondary protagonist, and where you really have to get comfortable with movement because it is a movement-led film.
Let's shift that over to then your casting. So your casting is for a movie like this is going to be very important, especially for your lead actress. What were some of the things you were looking for a lead actress, and finally, like for the folks that did sign on or that said, you know what, yes, we want to be a part of this project. Um, you know what did you feel was going to be the more important here? Would it be the names attached? Is it more the chemistry of the players? Were you looking for very specific things that only these people kind of fit for each character that's in there? Take all of that and do what you will.
Yeah. No, I mean, for us, the most important thing was understanding the material
Mhm.
because this material in the wrong hands can definitely be misconstrued. And so that was where we had an interview, and I was able to send her the full script. This was obviously in callbacks because I prefer not to send the full script in the first stage. So in the first stage, I asked multiple different actresses to send in self tapes. The self tapes were a lot closer to a lot of theater exercises that I asked them to do, because I think theater puts a lot more emphasis on body and movement, whereas film puts a lot more emphasis on face. And I thought face was going to be a lot more easy to find someone that was able to do what we needed them to do with the face. And the most difficult part to hire for was someone that was able to do that with the body. And so that was something that we took into the first round, which was all about having a self tape. And then for the interview, which was kind of the callbacks, that was kind of our chemistry test. But more importantly, it was a chemistry test with the material rather than with another cast member, because the lead actress spends her time mostly alone. And so I really needed to make sure that she understood why she was alone, that she understood the whole purpose of it. And we actually, talked a lot about Greek art, which was a huge inspiration for this story. And because that's the way they talk about the bodies is incredibly nuanced
Mhm.
and biological. And it doesn't, in film, while it's very sexualized and sensualized in Greek art, it's not perfect, but it's a lot more biological. And so we talked a lot about that, and her having that understanding and um, having her own thoughts about it was really, really important. And that was kind of our chemistry read.
Fantastic. And so you've got your cast, you've got your crew ostensibly ready to go. You've got, some money coming in for the from the crowdfunder. What are the missing pieces now? What as to get this film fully off of its on its feet and off to the races? What are the missing pieces?
Yeah, right now, it's a lot of things that are quite logistical. It's getting locations onboarded, which we're currently in the process of doing. Our crowdfunder, we have been very lucky to be able to host a crowdfunder that has allowed us to make this film. We're still having it open because at this stage, it is about every penny that comes in helps. So that's something that obviously we're still working on, and having as much financing coming in, helps us create a safer set, helps us create a more morally and ethical set. And so obviously that's something that we're prioritizing. And at this stage, we're getting a lot of people officially onboarded. We had a lot of people. We hired all our crew and all our cast prior to doing any fundraising, and that was quite intentional in getting a package ready. But at that stage, we weren't doing any active work because we weren't sure if we were going to be able to raise the money we needed.
Mhm.
At this stage, we now have enough money in order to get started, and that is something that we've started to do. So we're working on different props. We're working on getting, the actress and the intimacy coordinator familiar with one another and having kind of a secondary language that they can almost communicate with themselves, between themselves. Um, and yeah, what basically
The
what
safe
we're
word is pineapple.
exactly. They need to know. They need to know exactly. Yeah, it's those little things that go a long way in just getting everybody on board. And of course, I heard someone call financing like the F word of filmmaking, and I find that to be so true.
Yeah.
But it is kind of the foundation of everything, like money, and this is what goes back to the business conversation that we were having earlier. But without money, we can't make a film.
Yeah.
Because of how intimate this film is. There was I made it very clear from the beginning there was no way in hell that crew was going to go unpaid and that cast was going to go unpaid. Um, I just, maybe they're not getting paid industry rates, maybe they're not getting paid their average rate, but there was no way that I was not going to pay them
Yeah.
when they're going through such an intimate moment. So obviously that kind of is the foundation of everything that we're doing.
Yeah. And for anyone who's, a new filmmaker who thinks that, oh, you need to raise $50,000 for your first film, you need to raise this and that, it's not even about the amount. Like, you do need money
Oh,
for things like
no.
locations. You need things for permit. Well, I mean, here in the States anyway, I don't know how it is over there, but like permits and there's paperwork and all the things that, there are hard costs for. Your cast and your crew are there are so many when you're for making your first couple movies where like you rely on friends, you rely on family, you rely on, maybe non-professional actors and stuff like that. But when once you start paying people, and you start taking care of people, which is, I think there's a disconnect between like, I'll throw you money like you're a stripper on a pole, right? A few
Yeah.
singles, and then like you should be grateful for that. There's a difference between that and what do you need to be whole for this? And that level is different for every person you talk to. And you'll be surprised if they believe in your project and believe in you as a filmmaker, how little will make them whole and happy to do business with you. And ultimately, I even think that that's what it is because when they're doing business with you, they're patronizing you and your production, and they're putting their belief and trust and all of that and their respect on you and what you're doing. But I think a lot of people think that it's just the money is there's a facilitating aspect to it, and there is, but it's not the be all end all. But you're absolutely right. I love the idea of like it is the F word of the thing because I think that it has so many negative connotations attached to it, and it is of this necessity that absolutely sucks and does, is required. But I do want to stress to people like there are ways to make your movie
Yeah.
and make it well if you understand how to negotiate is one thing, but as long as you take care of your people, they will take care of you back.
100%. And you know what? That's something that this project has shown. We raised nowhere near 50 grand. And that was, and so especially in the first couple of short films, actually, like I stressed, please don't put money in it
Yeah.
because it's gonna be bad. And I don't mean that to be rude. My first couple of films were horrendous, and I
Yeah.
hope they never see the light of day. But like, I actually recommend that you don't spend any money in those first couple of shorts.
Mhm.
And then you can put a little bit of money and a little bit of money here and there, but don't stress about raising 50 grand like
Yeah.
for a long time
I
because
think your first couple of movies should be bad. I think that you get the fear. It's the fear of failure out of your system. And
me
I was the same way with writing. Like I wrote a novella and I self-published it. It's out there, people. Um,
too.
it's bad. It's not great. It's got crass jokes in it, and it's not. It's got a great solid concept, but it's not the
Yeah, yeah,
execution's
yeah,
just meh. But the my goal was I want to put myself to a deadline and I want to write this many words because then it's considered something of substance. And I want to put it out there to say that I did it. Not because I care about making money, not because whatever. It's because I needed to get over the fear of being out there.
yeah.
And, the fear, I think so many people, and that's why I applaud what you're doing and the way you continue doing it up until this point, which is you've not waited for permission to do things because the
Yeah.
permission is the excuse not to fail. Like, well, someone believes in me because they told me I could do it, instead of saying I can do this and just going out and going like, it doesn't matter if I fail because at least I did something. So many people don't do something, and yeah,
In film, you're not going to do that film.
yeah,
Like that's the truth. And it's, when we can critique the structure of the industry and the business of the industry all day long,
yeah.
but the truth is, if you're a beginner filmmaker and this is your first short,
Mhm.
and you're never going to be able to make loads of money like from it, and you're never going to be able to raise loads of money for it. And in fact, I think that kind of loses the point. You By making films that are horrible, your next film is going to be a little bit better and a little bit better and a little bit better to the point where they get okay, they get watchable. And I
Yeah,
think watchable is like something to applaud yourself for
yeah,
because you don't know how difficult it is to get a film watchable until you've made a couple films and they're unwatchable and you know that they're unwatchable. But yeah, I mean, look, don't like it's going to be easier said than done. Don't stress about the money. But you are going to stress about the money. That's just the honest bit about it. I think you need to be just constantly thinking about the bare minimum. And I think if you're going to put any money anywhere, it's to your crew and cast.
Yeah.
It is that is your first goal. But we raised about, we're on track to raise about 3 grand for this project. And this will be a 1 day film, a 1 day shoot. And that like 70% of that is going towards cast and crew. And but that's what I mean by don't worry about the 50 grand. Don't even worry about 10 grand. Don't worry about that. Like try and raise, if you're on your fourth film, if you're on your fifth film, if you're on, if you've done a couple films and you're trying to like start something different and do a little bit of budgeting, don't go for 50 grand. That is a recipe for disaster. You are going to stress yourself out beyond belief. You're going to burn yourself out. And frankly, a good story is a good story at the end of the day. And if you can do a good story on 3 grand, you can do a good story on 50 grand.
Yep.
But if you do a bad story on 50 grand, doesn't mean you're going to do a good story on 3 grand or vice versa.
I've been doing this a long time, and there are so many filmmakers that I've seen their movies that are like, I made this for 5 grand, and I'm like, I would love to see what you could do with 50 grand. Like, I would love to, or I made this with 25 grand, and I'm like, I would love to see what you would do with 100. Like, although you do get to a point where this happened with Kevin Smith, where he went from Clerks to Mallrats, and he's like, Clerks, they made it for, the short amount of money they did, the 27 and change that they did. And then it's like, oh, well, they were given X amount of millions for Mallrats. And he's like, that was too much.
Yeah,
Like that, like we were
yeah,
given the keys to the kingdom and they should not have done that.
there is too much. There is too much money. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem like it when you're an indie, but there is definitely too much money.
Yeah, I think that amount of money opens up too many questions, too many options. It becomes overwhelming, and then too many people have their fingers in the pot too, which increases expectation. And because you're pleasing not just your audience, you got to please that producer and that guy over here and that guy, that actor's agent, and all of these other people, rather than just going like, I want to focus on making a good movie. Yeah. So anyway, I appreciate you, reaching out. Number one, folks, reach out because Maria reached out just via email, cold email, and I was like, yeah, let's chat. And you'd be surprised how few filmmakers do that. So if you're ever worried about, reaching out, they might not be yes 100% of the time, but it's a numbers game, right? So reach out, and I'll make sure to put a link in the description and in on the website and stuff for your crowdfunder site. So hopefully a couple extra bucks come on in. This should, from the date of recording, this should be up in a couple of days or so. So that'll be good. I want to thank you for stopping by and saying hello.
Thank you so much. Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, my final note, I'll be quick with this, but my biggest advice is cold email. I cannot tell you how many opportunities I've gotten from just cold emailing. And what? People will ignore you and say no, whatever. Just ignore that and
Yep.
just keep cold emailing because you will be surprised. But yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Same to you.